Welcome to the Ottobock Experts on Demand Education Series. This is a previously recorded webinar presented by Executive Medical Director Dr. Andreas Kannenberg. In this seminar, Dr. Kannenberg will provide education on leveraging existing evidence for prosthetic and orthotic devices in order to connect patient needs and device functionality for justification of medical necessity. Participants will also learn how to improve clinical documentation and how to avoid common claim mistakes that may compromise reimbursement. This course is approved by ABC for 1.25 CEU credits. Please note that in order to receive credit, you are required to take the quiz and pass with a minimum score of 80%. The quiz link can be found on our Experts on Demand webpage or in the YouTube description below. Enjoy the webinar.
My name is Andreas Kannenberg. I'm the Executive Medical Director for Ottobock in North America. I'm a physician by training, licensed in Germany and Europe. My license is not valid for the United States or Canada. That would be too difficult a process to manage that. But as I don't want to treat patients here on this side of the Atlantic, I think it's absolutely fine to have that basic qualification as a physician. The topic today is medical necessity, how to read and play the game to win. Over the years, I have noticed that prosthetists and orthotists on the one hand, and physicians and nurses on the other, specifically at insurance companies, have a completely different understanding of what medical necessity is, what it means, and what information needs to be provided to let a claim go through. And medical necessity is a bridge between professional knowledge and business. So the business benefit of understanding the concept of medical necessity and meeting the expectations of medical claim reviewers and speaking their language means that you may expect higher approval rates, lower denial rates, fewer appeals, and shorter processing times. And I think that sounds pretty good from the business perspective. And that's why it is very important to know the key factors that play a role in that concept of medical necessity, to understand it, and to play the game, because only if you're able to provide the information that these experts on the insurance side need to make their decisions, or to provide waterproof cases, that they have no other chance than to approve a claim, is very important. So I will go through a couple of different chapters here. So what does medical necessity actually mean? Is that an invention of the insurance companies, or is the concept much older? What was it created for originally? What are the components of medical necessity, and how can you check the boxes to establish medical necessity? So what does medical necessity actually mean? In the end, it is the question whether or not the patient needs an item, and it could be a treatment that is applied by a physician, a surgery, or a drug, or a medical device like a prosthesis or orthosis. Does the patient need that from the medical perspective? And if so, why? And why are there no less harmful, less sophisticated, or cheaper alternatives than the device or the treatment that you are suggesting to the insurance company? The concept of medical necessity is not an invention of insurance companies. It is actually much older, and that is what physicians usually do every day when they think about what treatment to provide to a patient. So you always have to weigh potential risks versus potential benefits. So usually the situation is that the more effective a treatment is, the higher are the risks. So in the case of drugs, you usually have more frequent or more serious side effects. Or when you do a surgery, then you have the risk of the general anesthesia or the regional anesthesia, the risks of the surgery itself, the risks of immobilization. So the patients may develop a thrombosis and pulmonal embolism after the surgery. So these are things that you have to take into account when making a suggestion. What what treatment does the patient really need. So priority number one in medicine is a Latin term, nil nocere. It means do no harm. So that is the absolute priority number one. Whatever you do, don't do no harm, or if you have to take a risk to do harm, it should be as little harm as possible. So you have to weigh potential risks of an intervention, as I said, side effects of drugs or devices, risks of anesthesia and surgery against the potential benefits. And of course, in the end, only an unmet patient need or unmet patient needs justify more risky, more dangerous interventions. So if the patient is treated well, has no problems anymore with a treatment that is less harmful, why do a more potentially harmful treatment if there is no unmet patient need? The situation that we have in prosthetics and orthotics, however, is that I often read and hear in records, or I hear that from prosthetists and also from our Ottobock sales reps. I hear the sentence, well, my customer has a patient who has worked really hard and deserves a microprocessor knee. That is a statement that is pretty dangerous, because the word deserve is actually the opposite of what the patient needs. So, and to illustrate that a little further, have you ever heard a physician say this patient deserves to have surgery? Probably not. Or what would you think of your dentist if you said, well, you're a great guy, you deserve a root canal revision? Well, you would probably change the dentist, because that is not what you do. You don't do treatments because the patient deserves them. You do a surgery or a root canal revision only because the patient needs it. That is a very important point to keep in mind. And that is one of the shortcomings of many records in documentation in prosthetics and orthotics that is provided to insurance companies. So, using the word deserve, that sounds more like the provision of a microprocessor knee or any more advanced component in P&O would be merit-based, but medical necessity is about what does the patient need. It is solely based on the needs of the patient, on unmet needs. So with the development of health insurances, they have adopted that model. So, and of course, we live in times of unlimited wishes on the patient side and on the provider side, but limited resources. So we have to find a way in the middle, because we cannot afford everything that we would like to do. Medical necessity is intended to make sure that the patients receive medical items that they really need, and to make sure, or it is intended to reserve funds for items that patients need, rather than to waste funds on nice to have or luxury items that are nice to have, great for the patient, but not really needed because they don't address an unmet need of the patient. So when we look at that slide that I had before, the original process of weighing risks and benefits that a physician does on a daily basis. So, and we change it to the insurance rationale. So they don't weigh potential risks versus benefits, they weigh costs versus potential benefits. And their priority number one is not really do no harm. It is, their principle is we only pay more if there are more benefits. And when you weigh potential risks versus benefits, the insurance companies weigh costs of an intervention against potential benefits. And of course, on the purely medical basis, only unmet patient needs justify more risky interventions. In insurance language, that changes to only unmet needs justify more costly interventions. And of course, I'm well aware of the situation that there are insurance companies and claim reviewers and medical directors who really want to hamper the game in their direction. They just want to save money to save their bonuses. This is all true, but that's why it's even more important that our documentation creates waterproof cases, waterproof claims, so that in the end, the claim reviewers have no other choice, because they have to report to their superiors too, and they have to justify their decisions, especially if they make costly decisions to their superiors. And if they're able to lay the documentation out and say, look, medical director, here are the facts. I had no other choice than to approve the claim, and in the end, the medical director has to agree. I think that should be the goal. It won't work in every single case, but and with every insurance. But I think most of the medical directors that I've met are reasonable people, and they follow medical arguments. So it is, of course, sometimes or oftentimes a fight, but the fight gets easier when you provide the right information to them. So be careful with your choice of words. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Delete the word deserve from your vocabulary when you talk about medical necessity. So deserve indicates it's nice to have, but it's usually an automatic disqualifier for medical necessity. The patient deserves to get something. That doesn't really make sense. It's all about what does the patient need. And it's, as I said, it's all and only about what the patient needs, not what the patient deserves. The only exception where deserve may be an argument is with veterans and the Veterans Administration. But for civilian health insurance, workers' compensation, it's all about what the patient needs, not what the patient thinks or what you think the patient deserves. So let's look at medical necessity. What are the components? And I cannot stress enough, it all starts with unmet patient needs. And I think that's one of the most important shortcomings that I see in prosthetists and orthotists records and physician records. They always depict how great the patient is doing, how well the patient is able to ambulate, but I don't see any unmet needs. However, when we talk about medical necessity and the necessity to upgrade the prosthesis, if there is no unmet patient need, the whole discussion can stop right there. Because if the patient can do everything he needs and wants to do with the current prosthesis or orthosis, why give him a better one if that's not really needed? If the patient can do all these things, there is no need to upgrade the patient. So unmet patient needs, that's the foundation of everything. If there is no unmet patient need, there is no further discussion on medical necessity. Second component is you have to explain why and how the requested device meets the currently unmet patient needs and why less sophisticated or expensive devices are unable to do so. And the third component is, of course, you can say, let the insurance company take only my word for it. But if you're able to provide external evidence, research results, study publications on the devices that you're requesting for your patient that prove that these devices work better, are safer, provide better mobility and function than less sophisticated and expensive devices, even better. We come back to these components a little later. So what you have to deal with on a daily basis is, when you talk with manufacturers and sales reps, you're confronted with product marketing. And oftentimes I see that product marketing is translated one-to-one into medical necessity. However, the approach to product marketing and medical necessity for an individual patient is a little different. So in product marketing, you always hear that product A is great for your patient. And, even sometimes it's kind of preposterous. The other day I went on Ottobock's website on all the knees, and even an old knee and friction brake knee, 3R49, launched in 1972. When you go on the website of Ottobock, you still see this knee is great for your patient. Well, okay, 50 years old. still state-of-the-art technology? Okay, I'll leave that to you. So medical necessity is, however, what does the patient need and why? So, does the patient really need that great product? So in product marketing, we use the product-focused approach. We want to sell the product. In medical necessity, the approach is patient-centric. What does the patient need? And, we have that issue also with the language that it used. And I'm guilty as anyone using product marketing language when we talk about patient selection criteria, for instance. So what does that actually say? It is a product that is searching for a patient. So patient selection criteria means select a patient that fits the product. However, when we talk about medical necessity, it is more about the indication for which needs should we use a certain product. And when you translate that to statements of medical necessity or records, you can oftentimes read, well, the stumble recovery feature of a microprocessor knee is great to prevent falls. So, but, think about that. On the insurance side, that may spark the question, well, is that even true for patients who don't fall? And when we look in the literature on falls, there is that famous publication of Miller from 2001 that said more than half of the patients, 51 or 52%, fell at least once in the previous 12 months before data collection. But on the other hand, it means that almost half of the patients didn't fall during that time. So do they need stumble recovery too if they don't have a falling issue? So from the patient-centric approach side, it should be argued differently to say, well, the patient falls twice a week or twice a month or whatever, and needs stumble recovery to prevent these falls. So medically necessary or just nice to have? That's a big question. Where is the line? And of course, there is not a strict line. There is a large gray area. It's not only black and white. And I have chosen a couple of provocative examples that have nothing to do with medicine, or the first one has nothing to do with medicine or P&O. Let's say we have a father of four, and the father of four thinks that he needs a two-seated sports car as the family car. Well, this is an obvious mismatch of wants and needs. So certainly the two-seated sports car is not suitable to be a family car for a family of six. So, or we have the situation a little closer, an amputee who has never climbed mountains in his whole life all of a sudden wants a sports prosthesis for mountain climbing. Well, this is not impossible, but highly unlikely, and pretty clear mismatches between wants and needs. So, but let's look a little closer to real life examples. A patient who has never run in his life before he had the amputation then wants a prosthesis for running. This is not impossible, but requires explanation and justification. Of course, amputees, well, you can get smarter in life, and even at the age of 40 or 50, you may want to start doing exercise and running. Or you have the situation that you have an amputee with no documented history of falling, and now you're requesting a microprocessor knee to reduce the risk of falling. There is the situation that the need is not clearly established and documented. So if you have no history of falling in the prosthetist records or in the physician's record, and the insurance says, well, microprocessor knees, yes, they reduce the risk of falling, but why give that to a patient who doesn't have a falling issue? So that is something that you need to keep in the back of your mind. Another important issue here is that the policy language doesn't really help you. So because oftentimes the policy even fools clinicians in what medical necessity really is, because the policies confuse eligibility with medical necessity. So, and I've, as an example, I've chosen one of the MPK policies of one insurance companies, and it says, well, a microprocessor knee is considered medically necessary when all of the criteria set forth in A and B below have been met. And then we have these typical 4 criteria, usually based on the old Veterans Administration criteria that the VA no longer uses. And then at the bottom we see, well, the use of microprocessor-controlled leg prosthesis is considered not medically necessary in all cases, in all other cases, including when the criteria above have not been met. So that's a little strange, because if we say on top that it's only medically necessary when all the criteria set forth in A and B are met, and we say again, well, when these criteria are not met, it's not medically necessary, that is highly suspicious that this policy was not written by a physician, but by a lawyer. And when you read through the policy, and that is the reason, for the shortcomings of many records, the policy sounds like a microprocessor knee is a reward for the patient for meeting these criteria. But medical necessity, as I said earlier, is based on need rather than reward. And the reason for that confusing language is that these policies are usually written by lawyers, because these policies are legal documents. And that's why they're written by lawyers, but have to be administered by physicians and nurses. So lawyers hate ambiguity. They love clearly defined criteria. However, when we look at the reality of life, then it is almost impossible to define all the thinkable or imaginable cases of medical necessity in a policy. So that's why the language has to be a little vague and has to leave room for interpretation. And that is what medical staff, nurses usually, the claim reviewers, and the medical directors do. They have to exercise judgment and manage that ambiguity. So basically, if I had a proposal to make or a suggestion to make to an insurance company, I would say, well, the problem in that policy is that it says the use of a microprocessor knee is considered medically necessary when all the criteria are met. It should actually read may be. So the microprocessor or a microprocessor-controlled lower limb prosthesis may be considered medically necessary for transfemoral amputees who meet all these criteria. So it's more based on eligibility, because the question is, if the patient can do all these activities that are required here with a non-microprocessor knee without any problems, what is the reason? Why give him or her a microprocessor knee if there is no unmet need? So there is no logical reason to pay for a knee that is 3 times as expensive. So we have to look at these selection criteria more as eligibility criteria. So if the patient meets these criteria and is K3, then and only then we can talk about the unmet needs of the patient. So if the patient is K1 or K2, he doesn't meet the eligibility criteria, then we don't have to start talking about unmet needs anyway. But if the patient is K3, K4, meets these criteria, then we can talk about the unmet needs and whether they justify the provision of a microprocessor knee. So these criteria, you should look at them more like the criteria in a car commercial, when they advertise that well-qualified buyers can buy a certain model with 0% financing. So you have the right credit score, you're a well-qualified buyer. However, you actually want to buy a model for that they don't offer 0% financing, and then you start negotiating. So these criteria don't establish, from a physician's perspective, these criteria that are listed in the policies don't really establish medical necessity. They're basic eligibility criteria that say if the patient meets these criteria, then we can talk about unmet needs and whether they justify a more advanced and more expensive prosthesis or orthosis. So what should you consider when you write your record? One sentence that I want you to keep in mind is, it's a wordplay that I apologize for, but basically it's true. A patient who is doing great does not qualify for an upgrade. So if the patient can do anything he wants and needs with the prosthesis that he or she currently has, why give him or her a better one that is 3 times or twice as expensive? That doesn't make any sense. That there is no justification for that. Do not mistake the eligibility criteria for proof of medical necessity. 2 different concepts. And my recommendation is write your record with a mindset that you could do a much better job for your patient if his or her insurance would let you to. List all the unmet needs that the patient has to justify the upgrade to a more advanced and more expensive prosthesis or orthosis. So when you write your record, what you should document falls and fall-related injuries. That is a very compelling argument. Illustrate the functional limitations and restrictions that the patient experiences in his or her daily life. What activities does the patient need to do but is not able to or struggles with? What activities does the patient want to resume but is not able to or struggles with? Also document the patient's eligibility criteria and the policies. Please don't disregard them. You still have to check these boxes to say, okay, the patient is eligible. The patient basically qualifies for an advanced component that is covered by your policy. So, and now we can start talking about the unmet needs. And my recommendation is also that you create a cheat sheet for activities that are often required in the policies, like walking on uneven terrain or in the yard or negotiating slopes and stairs. But that is also one of the absurdities in some policies, specifically with regards to stairs. So like the Anthem policy that I showed you, the provision on stairs said, well, but stairs in the home environment, in the home of the patient and in the workplace don't count. All other stairs count, but not the stairs in the dwelling and in the place of employment or place of work. So, which means that if you are in a department store and you use the stairs, so a customer in the department store would qualify for a microprocessor knee, an employee would not. So that is completely absurd, but that is what we can expect when lawyers write policies. So at Ottobock, in our reimbursement department, we offer a table where you can write down, establish the unmet needs of the patient, so activities that the patient did prior to the amputation, activities that the patient struggles with or is not able to do, and you can describe how the patient does these activities with the current prosthesis or orthosis and what your expectation is, how the patient would do them in a safer and better way with the device that you are requesting. I would also recommend that you use validated outcome measures to support your patient assessment. So some of the outcome measures that I would recommend are ABC scale, activity specific balance confidence scale for the risk of falling, the amputee mobility predictor, that is what most of you do already, timed walk tests, timed up and go tests, 4-square step test. The problem is that there is no single test that covers all aspects of the patient's situation. So you will always need a set of certain 4 or 5 outcome measures to fully capture the clinical presentation and potential unmet needs of the patients. And I would also like to underline that I don't want to endorse any of these tests. So when you look at clinical tests and outcome measures that are available, that have a clinical meaning and are suitable for everyday clinical practice, there is a list of, let's say, 12 to 15 outcome measures, and I would recommend that you pick between 4 and 6 to cover all the aspects of the clinical presentation of the patient. So then it is important that you match the unmet patient needs with the device functions. So to justify your product selection, and I want to give you a couple of examples. So, and please always start with the unmet need. Never start with a product, because when you start with a product, that raises suspicion on the insurance side. So always start with the unmet need, because that unmet need requires the provision or fitting of a specific device function. And when we talk about the function, then it is important to consider what difference does it make to the patient rather than how it does work technically. So I know, and I've read that many times, that prosthetists love to talk about how the valves in a hydraulic unit work. So that is not what a claim reviewer or medical director is interested in. The decisive question here is, what difference does it make to the patient? What unmet need, what problem of the patient does it solve? So let's say we have a patient with frequent trips and falls. So here the specific device function that addresses that unmet need would be stumble recovery in a microprocessor knee, increased toe clearance by polycentric knees, for instance, or by feet that provide increased toe clearance, or improved prosthesis control through a vacuum socket. If you have a patient who struggles with long-distance ambulation, then smooth, effortless swing control in the knee or powered push-off in the ankle may be options that help solve that unmet need. If the patient suffers from recurring residual limb ulcers, then that would be a good argument for a vacuum socket that diminishes relative movement and shear forces between the residual limb and the socket. So here an example, that is a true case that I had to review last year. A patient with a temporary prosthesis with a 3R62. The prosthetist record said the patient was fit with a K2 activity level knee and has exceeded the limits of his K2 limb and his capabilities through hard work at home with exercises to strengthen his core, walking on level and non-level surfaces, ramps, and stairs. And then there was a whole list of water-related, saltwater-related activities that the patient wanted to resume with the definitive prosthesis. So we also had the physician's record. The physician's record stated it's a very active 57-year-old male. He states he's walking well on his temporary prosthesis. He states he's able to go upstairs. He has a little bit of difficulty going downstairs, but he feels very good and strong at this point in time and does meet the criteria for a microprocessor knee. Well, this is a little thin to justify that the patient should go from a 3R62 that he had a Fion 5-bar knee with friction swing control in the temporary prosthesis to an X3 in the definitive prosthesis. So the water activities, saltwater activities alone are not enough to justify that, because it's not really hard to see that there is a shortage of unmet needs here, mobility needs, to justify a Genium or X3 over a 3R62. So the record would have to be written in a different way to establish what activities the patient was struggling with. And again, this is a classic example for a patient who is doing great, doesn't qualify for an upgrade, and no surprise that the insurance denied the claim for an X3. So the goal must always be to describe medical necessity of the requested device in a logical way that an administrative law judge at the last level of appeal or an independent observer would wonder, why the hell did the insurance deny the device? Because the chain of arguments is so clear and so reasonable that the case is more or less waterproof. So why did the insurance deny the device? And what also helps is back your claim and judgments with evidence. Don't let the insurance take only your word for it. In that time today, evidence-based medicine, evidence is the currency of evidence-based medicine and practice. And of course, the concept of evidence-based medicine does not mean, or did not mean in the beginning, that only research evidence really counts. So the original concept of evidence-based medicine was that it is at the junction of clinical expertise of the clinician, clinical experience, research evidence, and also patient goals and patient values that have to be merged. Unfortunately, the pendulum has swung in a direction where, at least for insurance companies, currently it's only evidence that really counts. So that's why if we have that currency, we should use it to really pay. Evidence strengthens your arguments, so it's not only you saying that the patient needs a microprocessor knee or microprocessor foot or a C-brace or whatever advanced component it is. Evidence is harder to dispute than sole clinical judgment, and it forces reviewers to concern themselves with it, and they usually don't have the time. So on average, claim reviewers have 20 to 30 minutes to review a claim. So when I see documents that have been submitted to insurance companies, 80 pages long, 80 pages of copies of the prosthetist or orthotist record, of the physician's record, that's hard to work through in 20 or 30 minutes anyway. So, and when you provide additional evidence, it is almost impossible, but it strengthens your case. If the reviewer can present that evidence to the medical director to justify his approval of a claim, that helps tremendously. So, and just as a repetition, 2 examples which clinical benefits can be supported by evidence. So the first example is for the CELAC compared to non-microprocessor knees. So there are a lot of studies that have shown improved safety, up to 80% reduction in falls in K3 and K2 amputees with the CELAC, and improved balance and confidence while walking with the prosthesis. Improved and faster slope negotiation, faster and improved negotiation of uneven terrain and obstacles. Improved stair descent. So usually patients, or many patients, are able to descend stairs with reciprocal gait. Reduced cognitive demand to walk and improved multitasking while walking with a prosthesis. Very important. How often do we do that? That we are on the phone while we walk, or do other things while we walk. And there's also the potential to increase the overall mobility and K level. So when we look on the orthotic side, clinical benefits of the C-brace compared to standard knee, ankle, foot orthoses. So patients are usually able to use knee stance flexion during level walking for shock absorption. A nearly physiologic gait with almost no compensatory movements. No hip hiking, no circumduction, no vaulting anymore. Patients can usually walk with speed adaptive swing control, even when they have a stance control orthosis. Swing control, there is no swing control, it's only free swing, so it doesn't adapt to varying walking speed. Reciprocal slope and stair descent, reduction of use of assistive devices, and also improved perceived orthotic function, safety, and ease of ADL execution. So I want to show you a couple of case studies. It's sometimes in the reimbursement department, we have to work like medical detectives, like the Texas Rangers here in Austin. And I have three very impressive cases that show that when you work with a patient, you can find these arguments that you need to convince the insurance company. So case number one, patients who we requested an upgrade from a non-microprocessor knee to a CELEC. So history was that the patient had been using a 3R80 for 7 years and met the policy criteria for eligibility, so what the policy calls medical necessity, but the patient was a clear K3 and met all the criteria for eligibility for a microprocessor knee. The prosthetist and physician's records stated that the patient walks well with no mobility restrictions, is a K3 and meets the policy criteria, but didn't really establish an unmet need of the patient. So the prosthetist applied for a CELEC to reduce the risk of falling, but there was no established history of falling in the physician's record or in the prosthetist record. And surprise, surprise, the insurance denied the CELEC. So when our reimbursement department took over the case, we interviewed the patient and found out that he had sustained 2 fall-related injuries in the past 12 months. And for one of the falls, he visited an emergency room, for the other, an urgent care facility. And these invoices for care amounted to $8,100 within the last year before the claim for the CELEC was made. So also we found out that the patient avoids playing with his kids in the yard that is sloped and heavily uneven for a fear of falling, and doesn't take walks in the park as he would like to do. So we provided copies of the emergency care and urgent care invoices together with publications that showed that the CELEC may significantly reduce falls by up to 80% to the insurance company. And finally, they approved the CELEC. Second case, upgrade from a locked knee ankle foot orthosis to a C-brace. So history, the patient had sustained a paresis of the leg muscles after spinal surgery and was fitted a locked CAFO 12 months prior to the application for C-brace. The orthotist had documented severe back pain at the fall that resulted in an urgent care visit. We also had a copy of the record of the physical therapist that confirmed the paresis as an indication for a knee ankle foot orthosis, but also documented that the patient had 0 pain, so which was a mismatch with the orthotist record. We also had the record of the surgeon who confirmed the paresis but recommended an AFO, and the record of the physiatrist who also wrote the detailed written order was unavailable, as was the DWO at the time, and no surprise that the insurance denied the C-brace. So when our reimbursement department took over, we interviewed the patient and found that he had not sustained only 1 but 2 fall-related injuries with a locked CAFO in the past year. So, and both in urgent care invoices amounted to $4,400, which was funnily twice the amount of what the insurance had paid for the locked CAFO. So the physiatrist record that we finally obtained showed that the patient was taking opioids for back pain. And of course, that was the explanation why the physical therapist didn't find any back pain in the patient and documented no pain in his record. The physiatrist was willing to document that compensatory movements with a locked CAFO contributed heavily to low back pain, and with a C-brace with a more physiologic gait, probably the need for opioids would be reduced, or that the patient may be able to discontinue the use of pain medication. So we submitted copies of the urgent care invoices, the physiatrist's record, and the publications that showed that the C-brace provides nearly physiological gait to the insurance, and finally they approved the C-brace. So case number 3, replacement of a biome foot by an Empower foot. The history was that the patient was fitted a biome foot back in 2016, and that was worn out beyond repair in 2019. The prosthetist and the physician's records stated that the patient was a highly active K3 without any mobility restrictions. The prosthetist did the M-Pro to support the K-level determination. The prosthetist applies for a replacement of the worn-out biome with an Empower foot. And surprise, surprise, the insurance company denies the Empower. So then we took over and we interviewed the patient, and it turned out that this patient runs a cattle ranch in Texas. He uses a Fitbit, and that showed that he walks 18,000 steps a day on that ranch. And he carries 50 to 60 bags with 50 pounds each of cattle feed a day. When the biome broke, he had switched to a backup energy storage and return foot. And since that time, he needed 2 hours more for his daily routine and developed substantial sound knee and low back pain and was taking over-the-counter pain medication. So we asked the patient to share that information with a prosthetist and with a physician to be documented in both records. And then we submitted the records, or the prosthetist submitted the records, copies of the records, together with publications that the Empower may increase walking speed in active K3 patients, and yet unpublished data that the Empower may significantly reduce sound, residual knee, and low back pain. I'm currently working on that presentation, but that was the benefit of working with our reimbursement department, because we could use that currently yet unpublished evidence to support the case. And finally, the insurance approved the replacement of the broken biome with the Empower. So at the end, a couple of take-home messages, which I call the 10 commandments of documentation. So make your claims demonstrate medical necessity. The first one is think twice about what you write in your records, because you can't take anything back. Once it is in your record, it is in your record. So, and making changes after the fact is incredible. It is possible, but it doesn't leave a good impression with the insurance company. So that's why, I suggest that you think twice about what you write in your records, and every minute that you think about how you write your record saves you a lot of time when you write the statement of medical necessity or an appeal. Review the coverage criteria of the patient's insurance and make sure that you can check all the boxes needed. And what I've found out oftentimes is that the billing staff in prosthetic and orthotic clinics knows these criteria very well, but not always the clinicians are aware of them. And there is some back and forth to document these basic eligibility criteria, and I think that's not really necessary. You can save a lot of time when you are aware of these criteria and can check all the boxes in the first visit already. Document the unmet patient needs. Use that mindset. I could do a much better job for my patient if his or her insurance would let me to. So your record is not the place to describe the patients in the best light and to describe how well the patient is doing, no problems at all, very active, no restrictions. That undermines your claim when you want to file a claim for an upgrade. Number 4, make sure that your notes match those of the referring or ordering physician. That's also very important. Do not only ask for a copy of the physician's record, read it and compare it with your notes. Because oftentimes we have the situation that when I put the prosthetist or orthotist record and the physician's record side by side, and I read through both records, and sometimes I scratch my head and say, well, are they talking about the same patient or are they different patients? So it is very important that both records match up and that the physician's record supports your claim. Also, obtain a correct prescription or detailed written order. Sounds like a no-brainer, but obviously it isn't. I remember a case 2 years ago where the orthotist wrote in his record several times that the neurologist of the patient had prescribed 2 C-braces. I went through 80 pages of record copies, and the last thing that I got to see was the detailed written order, and it was a detailed written order for 2 stance control orthoses with a swing face lock. So the difference in value of that prescription was $135,000 because the reimbursement for stance control orthosis is maybe $7,500 for an electronic one if you get it through, and for a C-brace, the amount that you ask for is $75,000 or even higher. So make sure that all these records and the prescription, they all match up. Number 6, keep justifications brief, and that is something that I have to hold on myself oftentimes because I have the tendency to write too much also, but keep them as brief as possible. As I said, claim reviewers have 20 to 30 minutes. And be aware that Medicare discourages letters of medical necessity, so the medical necessity needs to be demonstrated in the records, and write it in your record entries. And don't take on the effort and the time to write a letter of medical necessity that is thrown out by Medicare anyway. Don't bother medical reviewers with lengthy technical descriptions. So when medical justification, this is not the time to talk about the technology, how the valves in a hydraulic unit work. Nobody is interested in that. It is important. What difference does it make to the patient? Number 8, focus on the unmet patient needs and how the requested device meets them functionally. Again, not technically. What difference does it make to the patient? So don't explain in detail how the stumble recovery works. Just explain that the patient has a problem with falls twice a month, and the stumble recovery has been proven in several studies to reduce the risk of falling, and with a C-leg, patients fall up to 80% less than with a non-microprocessor knee. Back the claims on a device with evidence whenever possible and tie it to the patient unmet needs. For Ottobock products, the evidence summaries in the are found in the reimbursement toolkits on the Ottobock website. Unfortunately, that website got restructured and they're not really easy to find. So if you don't find them on our website, please send an email to reimbursement 911 and we can provide you with these evidence summaries. What I have done over the years is I have condensed all these publications into a relatively concise compilation of all the proven evidence for the most advanced devices, for the C-leg, for Genium and X3, for Kenevo, for the C-brace, and for vacuum sockets and microprocessor feet. So the 10th point is read denial letters carefully. They can be confusing. I've seen that several times, that insurances seem to have template letters for medical necessity only, even if the actual reason for denial is that they dispute coding. So that can be very confusing because it's a 3 or 4 page letter that talks about medical necessity, and somewhere in the middle there is a paragraph of a couple of lines, 4 to 5 lines, where they dispute the use of certain codes. If you mistake the template letter and think that the reason for denial is medical necessity, and you argue with medical necessity, you're not addressing the actual reason for the denial, and you have no chance to overturn it. So read these letters carefully. Although they look very familiar, look for that short paragraph right in the middle of the letter that really talks about what the actual reason for the denial is and address it. All right, so that is what I wanted to share with you this afternoon. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you for watching this previously recorded Experts on Demand webinar by Ottobock. Please click the link in the video description to access the quiz and submit for continuing education credit. If you have any questions, please contact the education team at 1-800-328-4058 or via email at us.education@ottobock.com.